All right, so since it is 10 a.m. on the dot, we will get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Miala Annual Conference Virtual Breakout Session. I'm your session moderator, Amanda Nichols-Hess. I have a few housekeeping items to share with you. We ask that you keep your microphone on mute until you need to ask a question. You can ask your questions at any time by entering them into the chat panel. We will be saving all questions until the end of the presentation. After this session, please make sure to take a moment to provide feedback to our presenters by filling out the session evaluation form located in the conference portal. I'll share a link to that as well toward the end of the session. Today's presentation is Collaborative Collection Development, Potential Opportunities Identified, and our presenters are Helen Levinson, Mike Hawthorne, Matt Buckley, and Kara Cadena.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for that introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, as Amanda mentioned, Collaborative Collection Development, Potential Opportunities Identified. And just to give you a little bit more information about us, I'm Helen Levinson from Oakland University, and my co-presenters are Mike Hawthorne from Wayne State University, Matt Buckley from Saginaw Valley State University, Kara Cadena from Grand Valley State University, and thank you all very much for attending our session. Next slide, please. This is what we will be covering in our session today. This session is a follow-up to our Miala facilitated discussion that we did in 2019, at which time we discussed the advantages of collaborative collection development and the necessary elements to have in place in order to make it a successful venture, while still acknowledging the challenges that can exist in collaborative acquisitions. The major feedback we received from that facilitated discussion was to develop a pilot project for one specific resource, and so that's what we proceeded to do. What we'll review today is how we selected a resource for this pilot project as a result of a Michigan Association of State Universities, otherwise known as MASU, a MASU Library Survey of Resources, and how we examined the necessary elements to have in place for licensing agreements to be most compatible with collaborative collection development activities. This includes the necessity for the same contract terms and various other elements of the contracts that we will get into more detail during our presentation. One of the benefits of collaborative collection purchases is that it can offer participants the ability to share an advantageous pricing structure, but still maintain some flexibility to meet their specific subscription needs. One of MASU's earlier ventures into collaborative projects started with a collaborative collection management program called MySpy, which many of you may already know about or be a part of, and which now includes non-MASU libraries. So that collaborative project has grown. And now we're moving into collaborative collection development activities. And all of these collaborative projects reflect the elements that are listed in item 2B on the screen. Common goals, trust is very important among partners, regular communication and commitment to the goals of the collaborative project. We will share our pilot project results with you today, and we will definitely be continuing with this project. So look for more presentations in the future as progress moves along, and we'll be posting poll questions. We have some raise hand questions and a brief form for you to fill out towards the end. But feel free to enter any questions you may have in the chat as you think of them. Next slide, please. You're muted, Mike.
All right. Thank you, Helen. We're going to start off with a poll. Amanda's going to put up a poll for us, and essentially, if you had the opportunity to take your entire collections budget to the casino and blow it in hopes of making a big win, guessing how much money in aggregate the academic library spend on materials budget in 1 year, what would you guess? So we've got the date ranges, or we got the amounts up. Move this out of the way. But while we're doing the poll, we're going to look at a couple of avenues that we think can lay the foundation and has laid the foundation for a collaborative approach. First, we're going to look at a state university system. We have, for as long as I can remember, there have been various discussions about whether or not it's a viable or feasible or even good idea for Michigan to have a state university system. I remember having this conversation with Randy Dykhuis at least 10 years ago. And while no system is perfect, what a state university system allows us to do is it allows us to use the power of the state, laws, regulations when it comes to negotiating contracts with vendors, much like what the state does in other areas of negotiation, whether it's contracts with healthcare or roads or any other area, any other space. The power of the state can allow academic institutions to deal with vendors who are pretty aggressive and always looking for ways to minimize pushback from us. And so we think that a state university system is one avenue to help support and build on a collaborative approach. One of the SciFinder is one of those vendors that for those of us who've dealt with them, they're a pretty aggressive lot. And having the state behind us and negotiating with them would be pretty advantageous. Consortial. Many of us belong to multiple consortia. But for us, most of our relationship is with MCLS. And MCLS has done a phenomenal job on behalf of academic libraries over the years. Stephanie Davis should be commended for the work that she does on our behalf. The challenge with that is that the relationship that we have with MCLS is in many ways voluntary. And one of the avenues that libraries can do to really help and increase the strength and influence of MCLS relative to vendors is insisting that certain products, SciFinder, will only be acquired through MCLS. This will strengthen MCLS's hand in dealing with vendors, and it will also ensure that there's a level playing field in terms of the outcome, in terms of access and affordability. MyAlla is another avenue. What we're doing right now is having a discussion of some of the challenges that we're all facing with vendors and acquiring resources, and how we can acquire them in a way that everyone can access and they're affordable, and there's a level playing field. The outcome that we're always looking for, and we're going to talk about ideal license terms later, is equity, affordability, and accessibility. These are three nouns that are action oriented. And equity in terms of who can access resources, affordability, access at a level that is commensurate with what schools can pay, and accessibility. Many of us, we negotiate terms with vendors where we only have access to one portion or one module within a larger platform, but a collaborative approach allows all libraries, regardless of size, to access all content on the platform. So now we're going to find out who lost their money at the casino. Next slide. According to ACRL, this is how much money all of the academic institutions, higher ed, master institutions, should I say, spend our materials budget in 1 year. That is a pretty significant amount of money. And there's a lot of duplication in that money, in those spends across the various libraries. And so if we brought that money together, if we collaborate in how we approach vendors, we could leverage that in a way that benefits more libraries, regardless of your size. Matt is coming up next.
Hi, everyone. So what you're seeing on the screen here was, and to take a step back for a minute, back in 2019, and Helen addressed this briefly a little earlier, we realized we needed some type of mechanism, even if it was a very basic one, to know who had what in terms of each other. So of the 15 MASU libraries, it would help us as a group to be able to identify like which resources do we have in common, which ones do we not have in common, that type of thing. Because when it comes to any type of collaborative arrangement, we would want something where enough of us already had some kind of an agreement where it would make sense to get into a much larger collaborative arrangement. And kudos goes to Kathy Mason in Eastern Michigan, who helped start the list. And it is a pretty basic list where we basically had shared a Google Doc or a Google spreadsheet amongst collection or acquisition librarians at the 15 schools. And we basically inputted the resources or databases and we compiled who had what. And what you're seeing on the screen here is like a little snapshot of the top of that list. A little caveat to that. I mean, there's some things that we kind of left off, meaning, for example, like the MEL databases, like Academic Search Complete. Obviously, most libraries that are part of MEL can have those resources. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to put those on. We were doing things where we each, either through MCLS or on our own, we're subscribing to resources. And what you see on the screen is that SciFinder was the #1 or top number total among the resources or databases. 12 of the 15 schools reported having access to SciFinder. And as you see on the list, there's other pretty well-known databases, CINAHL, ProQuest PsycArticles, Springer, and various other products. But having this list started to give us the capability to identify which ones we might want to pursue. And as we looked at this, in many ways, SciFinder did make the most sense. So next slide. So as I briefly mentioned, SciFinder, the big thing for us was that it was at the top of the list. 12 of us had it. So contractually, it would make sense in some type of collaborative arrangement. The other thing, and this is going to be kind of a poll for everybody. Now, you could either just pop your hand up or even type yes or no into the chat. How many of you have a chemistry department at your institution? And it looks like pretty much everybody in chat is saying yes, and there's a couple of raised hands. So the point being that pretty much the vast majority, our thinking was the vast majority of institutions in the state, more likely than not, do have a chemistry department. So it would all boil down to, related to SciFinder, who wants it and who can actually afford it. Because like many resources, certain databases can be relatively expensive. The other thing with SciFinder that we appreciated was it also is a pretty unique resource. Most of our databases, I think that most of us subscribe to, are either an index or a full text database. They tend to have articles or videos or ebooks. SciFinder is a bit different. It focuses, I mean, as I'm sure many of you probably are aware, one of the premier resources of chemistry literature. If you need to go to a place to go to find out about chemical substances or chemical reactions, it's where you're going to turn to. It also is unique in the sense that the vast majority of our resources tend to be like, if you're on campus, you can just hop right on in and you get into the database, or even off campus. SciFinder typically wants you to create an individual account for each user to use when accessing the product. So it does have a lot of uniqueness that you don't typically see in a lot of the resources. So once we identified that, look, a lot of us already have it, so it makes sense on some level. And it also makes sense that the vast majority of institutions around the state more likely than not have chemistry departments and might be interested in what truly is a unique resource. That kind of gave us the guidance. This is what we wanted to focus on for some type of unique collaborative arrangement where we went for a one large big deal as opposed to individual contracts. So to give you a little more detail, particularly about the license terms and more, we're going to pass it over to Kara.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. So the license, we've kind of thrown up a couple of ideal license terms in general as a start for this slide, but the license really demonstrates the agreed upon relationship between the provider and the paying customer, the libraries. And it's really important to know what your goals are in the contract before you enter the agreement. So going back to what Helen was saying at the beginning, it's important to have those shared values and trust if we're going to enter into an agreement together. But libraries deserve a little bit more flexibility than we've historically seen in our licensing. So for a group purchase like the one we're talking about here, we'd want the same terms for all participants, things like no NDAs, exit clauses in case we run into financial hardship, and transparency. And given our collective power in this group, these should be attainable. And I was hoping, Helen, you could expand upon the notion of transparency for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kara. There's generally been an industry-wide effort to negotiate for contract terms that are beneficial to the libraries who are the paying customers. These negotiations have been successful. In addition, opt-out clauses are becoming the norm, and NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, are becoming the norm as well. Kara, could you click on the transparency link there, please? This is this transparency link has also been entered in the chat, should you want to take a look at it in more detail later. Transparencies with costs is not the only thing that needs to be transparent and open. The content of what each library is paying for also needs to be transparent and not confidential, as well as the overall terms of the agreement. Library A may be paying $300,000 for a resource, and Library B may be paying $500,000 for a resource. But what is the difference in the content that each library subscriber has access to? And a true cost comparison cannot be done without knowing these details. So we gathered more detailed information on the individual SciFinder subscriptions of our 12 master libraries. And this particular, what you see on the screen here is, if you could scroll down a little bit, Kara, so they can see the details. There we go. This is a posting on the website of Williams and Mary Library, which shows in complete transparency the details of their big deal journal packages. And it's an example of the benefits of eliminating the confidentiality clauses in licensing agreements. The need for transparency in all elements of your contract, costs, content, etc. Williams and Mary was one of 6 Virginia University libraries that collaborated on an Elsevier Freedom Collection collaborative acquisition. This collaborative collection development effort allowed for each of the participants to maintain their specific title lists and gain substantial cost savings. And we'll be talking about that endeavor a little bit more in a moment. So our questions to you What other transparency components or ideal licensing terms are important to you? So please enter your ideas and thoughts on this in the Menti link that's been posted in the chat. And you can enter that access code to share your thoughts with us on this important part of making collaborative collection development activities be successful. What clauses in your contracts have you always wanted to share with other colleagues who are negotiating with vendors? Or if you've already stricken NDAs from your agreements, what clauses do you routinely share that make your negotiations more effective? So if you have any problems entering the Menti link, feel free to enter your thoughts in the chat. And if we have time at the end of the session, we will review what some of you have entered and discuss it further. Having these common elements as part of licensing agreements shows the shared values of library acquisitions in general, and more importantly, for collaborative collection development activities. Next slide, please. Mike, back to you.
Sorry. Thank you, Helen. As Cara, Helen, and Matt pointed out, it is critical that there are licensing terms such as no NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, exit clauses, equitable access to resources, and pricing models that take into account an institution's ability to sustainably afford a critical resource. Right now, Helen will walk us through how the Virginia Research Libraries approach collectively aligning their materials budget when it came to their spend with Elsevier.
Okay, thanks, Mike. What we're sharing on the screen right now, and Amanda also posted this link to this press release in our chat, should you want to take a closer look at it later after our session. This is a description of the process that the 6 Virginia Research Libraries that I mentioned just a moment ago, that they recently performed in collectively negotiating the last year of their multi-year contract for their Freedom Collection with Elsevier. And it's important to note that they were in a multi-year contract, but they saw the financial need to renegotiate the last year of it. So when libraries approach this with vendors, they can be successful with that. And they were able to cut their spend by about half, while each library maintained their individual title lists. And it's an example of collaborative collection acquisitions that was most advantageous to each participating library. It involved libraries of varying sizes. There were widely different student enrollment numbers, and it was a combination of different Carnegie classification libraries. There were some R1s, there were some R2s, and I looked up all of the Carnegie classifications for all 6 participants, and it also included a master's large programs university, which is obviously very different from an R1 organization. Another benefit to this collaborative collection development is that these libraries then had additional funds to invest in other needed resources and expand the scope of the resources that could be made available to their patrons. The 6 libraries found that transparency in the negotiations, first sharing costs among themselves and then sharing them publicly, was instrumental to the entire process. As they stated in this press release, they found that transparency gave them leverage in reaching the best outcome for their communities. Back to you, Mike.
All right. Kara's going to pull up the Mentimeter poll for us. And we're just going to take a couple of minutes to see what your feedback was.
Not showing me the results. Mike, do you want to share yours?
Sure. Okay. Share. Okay. Can you everyone see?
I expect to in a second. It says you started.
Okay.
Nothing's happening.
Nothing is happening. Okay. We're going to go ahead and just keep things moving. We will share out the results of the poll at a later date. Everything is frozen. So
If you stop, I'll start sharing again, Mike.
okay. Stop sharing.
I think I stopped it for you.
Okay.
Did it work? Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. Kara is up next, and we'll share out the results of the poll at some point.
Thanks, Mike. We're excited to see what ideal terms and values you entered in there. So let's see. I think we have a poll that Amanda's going to throw up. We want to know if you had budget cuts in fiscal year 21, which for Grand Valley is about to come to a close. So I'm seeing a resounding yes at 76%. Some of you didn't, which is great to see. I'm going to get this off my screen. So the pandemic certainly accelerated the erosion of our buying power, making collaboration among libraries more necessary. There was an Ithaca study that was done in 2020 on the impact of US academic library budgets during COVID. And Amanda's going to throw the link to that study in the chat if you want to take a deeper look at that. But the results of their survey showed that roughly 75%, which is interesting that our results were very similar, 75% experienced cuts during that fiscal year of COVID. And roughly 20% of library directors reported that they did not have set budgets at the time the survey was conducted, which was in September of 2020, which is late in the year to not know your budget. So there was widespread uncertainty about the future, which changes our practices. And we see this in what we're collecting and how we're collecting. Streaming is king. Ebook expenditures are rising while print budgets are shrinking. These are indications that libraries have been subject to expenditure controls and forced to shift our practices and priorities. And we are all pausing spending wherever possible. And this is certainly the case in Michigan. We have one more poll. If you'd participate with us, we want to know if you're expecting budget cuts next year, if you know about what to expect. Okay, trying to count up participants. Maybe I'll give it 30 seconds, but it's looking like a resounding uncertainty. Some of us know and have an idea. I also don't know what to expect next year. I'm always anticipating a reduction, but it just kind of proves our case a little bit further that all the more reason to find ways of using our collective talents, budgets, knowledge, and experience to make our dollars go a little further and to create new pathways, more equitable pathways to our resources. So I want to hand it over to Matt, if you want to close us out, and then we can get to questions.
Hi, everyone. So the one thing that we didn't talk a ton about, but should, is we were talking this mostly about from our perspective, from librarians' perspectives, but the one key piece to have in all of it is from the vendor perspective, from SciFinder's perspective. And the fact that we would come at them with potentially 12 libraries is great, but they would probably be coming from the point of view, we want even more libraries and we want even more money, meaning like the larger the pool, the larger the money, the more likelihood you'll be able to get some type of collaborative arrangement. We're almost coming into it from like a big box approach. Why can Walmart or Costco or all those huge stores be able to afford certain merchandise at prices lower than everybody else? It's because they can negotiate large deals for a larger volume at a lower price. So we're kind of taking that type of approach to it, where if we can go to SciFinder and say, hey, not only do we have 12 libraries on board, we have 15 libraries or 20 libraries or whatever the number on board. We would like this larger deal. Can you negotiate a rate for us? We believe we could potentially get something done that we could, because the ultimate aspiration we have always been talking about is finding ways to make it so that libraries that don't have larger budgets, that are on much tighter budgets or cutting things, might still be able to get resources they need or want at a price point that would work for them. And we think this might have that opportunity. So we're going to post in the chat a link that if you are not, if you're part of MASU or not part of MASU, but you're interested either in participating in some type of collaborative arrangement with SciFinder, or you're just interested in general about collaborative collection development, and maybe in the future, in some other resource you'd like to possibly work on some type of collaborative arrangement. We want to hear from you. We want to work with you to set up some type of larger scale collaborative arrangement. So that's what the link is for. It is essentially just trying to gather some information. It's just asking for name, email, institution, that kind of thing, so we can be in contact with you. And we're ready for any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Helen, Matt, Kara, and Mike. And I just want to encourage anyone, please feel free to put your questions into chat, or at this time, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please feel free to ask your questions that way.
Also, feel free to continue to fill out that form. It's like Matt said, it's a pretty simple form. It doesn't ask for too much. And we definitely want to hear from you, whether you're interested in this collaborative collection acquisition now, or not sure, or perhaps in the future, or if you have other resources in mind that you were maybe at one point beyond your reach, but you can see where realistically you would be able to acquire it if it were part of a collaborative collection purchase.
So I have a question going back to something that Mike talked about at the very beginning about the sort of state university system. And I know there are many different approaches to that kind of collaborative system, I guess. And in terms of collections and collaborative collection development, I wondered if there was one exemplar that really stood out to you all, being experts in this area. If there was, you know, given our current constraints, is there a particular state, location, you know, group of universities or institutions that you all would like to see Michigan emulate in harnessing our collective power and trying to increase our access to resources in more equitable and cost-efficient ways?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, I like what they do in California. I think California has done a really great job, not only leveraging their combined publishing might, financial might against the vendors, but they're always looking, they're always forward thinking in terms of new opportunities and new resources. I don't think they don't all, sometimes they don't always get it right, but I guess it's a question of perspective. But I think California, the system that they have is really phenomenal. A couple of years ago, when they canceled their big deal contract with Elsevier, and I think that it was valued at something like $50 million. That had major ripple effects across the country and across the world in the academic space. And so I think California is for me, is probably a great example of what a state system could do and is capable of doing, and the influence it could have outside of its outside of the state itself.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add to that Virginia has a very good model. Viva is their consortium, and although they were not the broker, so to speak, of the example that we posed as part of our presentation of the 6 libraries that cut their spend on their Elsevier Freedom Collection. They were involved in it in a peripheral way. Other library consortiums that work, or groups of libraries that work very well in collaborative collection development, is Ohio with the Ohio system. Although they have had hefty state support going way, way, way back for an integrated ILS system. So there are state or regional examples that do exist that have advanced further, and we, throughout this whole project, we have looked to those other setups to define where we could move forward. And I consulted with the Viva director on our particular project, and so we definitely have a sense that it's doable.
I've got the Menti working, so I'm going to share again if you all want to see those results. Can you see? It's a word cloud.
Yep.
And make it bigger.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, interlibrary loan's a good one. That's where SciFinder gets tricky too. Some people have in their contracts that they don't allow sharing.
And one final point I kind of wanted to make was, and we didn't talk about it too much, but it's something that we were all acutely aware of, is kind of, I don't know if I call it an imbalance, but just the structure of the state itself, especially among the state schools, where if you look at the sizes and budgets of the schools, it's very lopsided almost, because you have 2 or 3 schools that are very large enrollments, large budgets, schools that are middle size with pretty decent budgets, but a little smaller enrollment. And then you have several schools that are on the smaller end with much smaller budgets and much smaller enrollment. And so finding, again, that word equity, finding a way to try to make it equal for everybody across the board, that if there were resources that they desperately needed, to try to find a way to arrange it, is I think what this whole project is ultimately about, because we're trying to get it so people can get what they really want, hopefully.
I noticed in the Menti results that someone entered perpetual access, which is a very interesting element of negotiations of licensing agreements these days. And what some vendors have started to do in order for libraries to meet their current budgetary needs now, vendors are suggesting giving up perpetual access. And that's really not an acceptable trade. So, and libraries have been successful in fighting back on that. So it does require constant vigilance in terms of being able to fulfill what you need for your patron access at a fair price. So I'm glad someone entered that in the Menti survey.
So we have just about a little less than 5 minutes remaining. If there are any other questions, comments, observations, please feel free to share those in chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. I know our presenters would love to hear from you.
I have a question, and I'm from a very small single subject graduate library. When I see a slide that says, 40% of the content is not being, accessed, or 30% is not being accessed, that kind of makes me nauseous, and I'm wondering what your perspectives are as big state libraries when you are evaluating contracts in light of usage figures like that. How do you see it, or is the picture so large that you can kind of cope with that, and as long as everybody seems to be getting access to what they need to do their work?
I can take a crack at that if you like. Usage can be measured in a couple of different ways, and the standard ways to measure it have been cost per use. And some libraries feel that if their cost per use is reasonable, there's still elements of the resource, if it's not used, they can absorb that. A lot of libraries are subscribing these days to a service called Unsub, which allows cost per use balanced by ILL to still be able to make the overall spend lower without losing access. Like you say, you see the elements that have zero use or close to zero use. So you can eliminate those. And there's a newer way to evaluate costs, and that's fair retail price or fair market value. And there's actually an individual named Curtis Bundy, I believe, out of Kansas State. Don't quote me on that. He recently published a paper. He's been giving presentations on this for a while now, and he recently published a paper how you need to bring that element of analysis into your cost usage to figure out how to either break out of a big deal or not break out of a big deal, or negotiate appropriately with vendors to know. Vendors have very high profit margins, and Spark also holds a lot of webinars on this as well, so that you know where to come from as part of your negotiations to reach the price point you need, and the vendors will reach a price point that they can accommodate as well.
What would you say a tolerable cost per use figure range would be?
That can vary a lot from,
right.
And it also can vary based on how valuable the resource is for your organization, your department. It can be, I've seen cost per use like $1.03. I don't even pay attention to that. That's almost free to me. Up to like when it starts reaching $60 per use, that's when my alert goes up. But other universities could have a higher tolerance, who have bigger budgets than mine.
I can take a crack at it a little bit too. Saginaw Valley is a little bit on the smaller side compared to some of the other, like Oakland or Grand Valley or Wayne. And typically what we try to do is more of a The $20 range is the real cutoff, because once you're in the $20 to $25 range for cost per use, that's like ILL type loan rate
Right.
material.
Mhm.
Then once you've hit that or gone over, you've really gotten into an area where it economically doesn't make a whole lot of sense to keep subscribing.
Okay. I appreciate the perspective. Thanks.
Feel free to contact any of us individually if
Mhm.
you want more, or all of us.
Yeah, usage really drove like the decision too about which one would we want a group purchase on. I mean, what are we paying for every year anyways? And we all have those chemistry departments, so SciFinder was just a no-brainer.
All right, well, thank you everybody for participating in this session. Thank you to our wonderful presenters. We're at our session time now. So let's give them a round of applause and thank them for sharing their expertise and lots of ideas and thoughts to mull over as we go forward. I've put this evaluation survey link into chat. I hope that works for everybody since it's behind the MIALA conference portal. If not, you can log into the conference portal and look for the event surveys tab. So I'm going to stop our recording now.